Welcome to Interface. We have with us today Rajesh Mohan, partner KPMG, head of management consulting, Bahrain, Qatar, and overall head advisory, KPMG, Qatar. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
You will be talking to us today on consulting business. To begin with, what is this consulting business?
Consulting business, to start with, is a broad landscape. For the purpose of today's discussion, probably we can try and define that as consulting excludes. Let's say the exclusions would be audit. It doesn't include audit. It doesn't cover tax. Mm-hmm. We also can exclude the BPO services, what you call as the BPO, the BPO services that we are used to in India. Mm-hmm. So that would bring us a whole range of business advisory services that the consulting firms provide to various clients across the globe. So to start with, broadly, I would take three major clusters, and every consulting firm would have its own nomenclatures, how they explain consulting business. But I would say, to start with, for the sake of discussion, maybe it's useful to make three clusters. One is to start with what we call as transactions business. Transactions business is where consulting firms help clients to actually go through transactions that cover mergers and acquisitions, that includes IPO, which is the initial public offering deals, everything that's connected with the growth agenda. So you're buying a company, you're divesting a business, all of that gets covered within that range of service that we offer, which is called as the transactions business. Then you have the mother of everything, which is the management consulting, which again is a very broad brush of services that we offer. And I think to start with, within management consulting, it's important that we segregate some of the major functions or the services that we offer. There's what you can call as the strategy part of the consulting business, which is where the consultants or the consulting firms help companies establish their strategies. When I mean strategy, how do they run their business? What are the prospects? How do they go through? It's a strategy. It's a field in itself. For people who are going through management studies will understand what strategy is. It's a vast area really, and consulting firms specialize. There are very, very, very boutique consulting firms who only do strategy business. But generally, all consulting firms do advise in one way or the other the strategy business. I think moving on from that, there is a lot of operational strategy. Once you've said what you should achieve, how you should achieve, it's a question of then setting up the organization. How do you do? And within that, again, you have a host of services around people. People is one part of the agenda. Then you have the system and the process. So we call it as people, process, systems. So that's the three pillars of an organization around which you work or you develop an organization. You then have the whole implementation part of it, which is about implementing the strategy, which is again you would have heard the mechanisms around balanced scorecard, etc. So there's another host of services which comes within that. So broadly, I would say you have strategy services. You have operational strategy, which is operational consulting, which is about, it covers the entire paradigm of an organization, which is from purchasing to supply chain to logistics, you name it. Then the other important part to pick up really is the IT services, the IT services that an organization requires. So if the consulting firms do advise on what IT, how do you run your IT department? What should be your IT strategy? How does that align with your business? What sort of an application, what sort of an enterprise architecture you should have? What applications you should use? Is it an ERP that you need, or you don't need an ERP? If you need an ERP, what sort of an ERP? So the multiple questions to be answered. And even the consulting firms, there are specialized consulting firms, but also other the big consulting firms also help clients in implementing IT systems, which is a big thing. For example, ERP implementation is a huge area of consulting business. So that's another segment which requires highlighting. I talked about people business. People business is again a very, very important business of today, because we are talking about, you know, the good organizations succeed because of good people. And I think there's a need to advise clients on people business. You also have, you know, as I said, the other bit, the third bit, when I talk about transactions, I've spoken about management consulting. The third thing I would like to add to it, the third important cluster or the service offering would be around risk and compliance. So it's a very important area around risk management. How do organizations manage the risk? Because if you're in business, you're taking risk, and you need to find a way to manage your risk. And that's what, you know, the service, that's a big service offering for consulting firms, and organizations do need help in that area, because you know, it's a very, very sophisticated, and there are multiple challenges that lie in a business. So managing your risk, and you also have the compliance services, because today if you're in business, you have to comply with a host of rules and regulations, and that requires you know, the compliance help from consultants. How do you comply with laws, because laws and regulations are very complex in today's business, and there's a cost or a price to pay if you don't comply with regulations. So I think as I said, it's a very broad landscape, and it's very hard to pin down a definition. But you know, that's, if I've touched, that could be the broad paradigm of how consulting business runs.
In simple, it means any service that your client needs.
In essence, that's what it is, because a lot of if you look at the industry today, it's no longer a commodity service, because every client situation is very unique. Today, a client might have a challenge around profitability. A client might, the other client or another you know, company would have a problem around growth. How do I grow my top line? Some of them have a problem growing their top line. So where do I make my sales from? Today I'm selling X. How do I make it 3X? How do I make it 10X? So other problem for another company would be, how do I make my company profitable? So that brings cost into the equation. So as I said, you really, the consultant's challenge today is really to come and tailor the proposition or your ability to respond to a client challenge, a unique situation that the client is posed with. So I think that's also one of the real challenges that the industry is going through.
I think the industry requires enormous trust of the client. You know, unless the client trusts you, the client will not share vital information. So how is this happening in the industry? Do you get complete trust of the client, or sometimes you'll have to work with incomplete information?
It's a great question. I think the entire business of consulting works on trust. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would have read the book of David Meister. It only talks about trusted relationship. And those who have really gone at the top of the pyramid, the consulting firms which have really hit the top of the pyramid, are the ones who have really had the trust of the client. Because what you really are, a client is reaching out to you because he's got a problem, and he's sharing his vital information, which if leaked out to the market or to the competition, obviously but consulting firms have very, very tight confidentiality rules. So I don't think that's a big issue, but really gaining the confidence of the client, the trust of the client, is paramount in winning business and winning the trust of the client. So it's a very, very competitive industry. So unless you are able to win the trust of the client, what distinguishes you is a very thin margin, really. So it's really, trust plays a very, very important factor in the minds of our clients, really, when it comes to winning business.
So consultancy is a huge industry globally. What is the kind of change happening in the industry?
I think if I can say one thing that's seen as a change, and change being constant, is the specialization. Today, clients are looking for specialists to advise them. The world of general, the generalists have gone. So it's about specialists, as you would see in the medical field. It's all about specialization. Consulting field is again going into an extreme level of specialization now. So every single problem that a client faces, he would like a consultant who specializes in that area. So if today if I need someone to advise a client on how do I procure? How do I purchase my supplies? Or how do I make my procurement department work? He requires a procurement specialist to come and advise. He's not expecting a generalist who understands generally about how organization works. No, because procurement in itself is today a very, very specialized area. I'm taking an example for that matter. And the same applies for IT. For example, you're talking about IT, if it is, you have to be a specialist in that particular area to advise the client. So the real shift that we are seeing is the time is shifted from being a general advice where you could get away with to a very, very specialized consulting business.
Even for ERP consulting, you will need domain consultants, right? You may need finance consultants, HR consultants, and so on.
Layers and layers of specialists, to be honest, because you look at any business. I think the most vital thing is knowing that particular business, because you take and that leads me to the point of where is industry verticals today. A lot of the consulting firms are organized across industry verticals, which I think is very, very relevant in today's context, because without you having specialization in industry verticals, so if you take a retail business, a retail store business, whether you're advising, let's say, the retail chain of supermarkets, you need someone who understands how supermarket business is run, how a hypermarket business is run. You cannot expect someone who's a specialist in banking to come and tell you how supermarket is run. No. So I think that's almost a given today. So unless you are able to demonstrate that you understand that particular industry very well, clients do not accept consultants to come and advise, because you need to understand at the end of the day, consulting business is about you being consulted. You're being consulted about something which the clients have a problem, and more often than not, they need a genuine opinion from you. And I think to be consulted in itself is a privilege, and only if you have the knowledge, you can be consulted. So I think it's specialization, it's experience, it's having done you've got to have made your mistakes, and you've got to have grown through the ranks to be able to give the right advice. So I think that's the real, the change that we are seeing, which is about the specialization. You cannot be a generalist and get away in consulting business.
Okay. How do you select your clients? As these top companies, they'll have plenty of choices. Now, what are the criteria in selecting clients for consulting?
I think each consulting company would have its own parameters as to how they go about. But in general, I can say that you select clients where you feel confident to advise them. If I'm very good in banking, or if I'm very good in, let's say, real estate, I'm very good in when it comes to oil and gas industry, then my preference will be to those clients. But if I'm very weak in areas which are not my, sort of construction, the metal industry, those are not my core competency, or that's not where, I think that becomes automatically a filter to select clients. Okay. Secondly, you also select clients who, again, I'm generalizing. You tend to work with clients, depending upon their size and scale. Large consulting firms would like to work with large clients more often. But having said that, it depends on the strategy of every single consulting firm.
Sir, how do you bill your clients for the services?
Consulting business has got its own pricing, or the pricing techniques that consulting firms use. And I think it also varies from services to services. I talked about corporate finance business. Corporate finance business has got a very different pricing mechanism as compared to, because a lot of it, the large deal, the deal component, there's a large success fee, involved in it, apart from the retainer, the fee structure. In consulting business, when you talk about, there are two major pricing techniques, which would be, one is the time and material, what you call as T&M, which is you actually bill for the time you spend. So if a consultant spends a day, he's billed for a day. The client gets billed for a day. It's like how a law firm would bill. Or the second one, the second pricing mechanism is where you bill on a lump sum basis, which is the scope of work. The scope of work is defined. You clearly know what the outcomes are. Both parties agree to that scope of work. So you know what it takes to deliver. Then you have a fixed fee to deliver that. I think time and material is more common when you are unable to pin down the scope very well. The timing could be, the timing is not a fixed affair. Then you tend to go towards a time and material.
Okay. Well, this is highly qualitative kind of work. You need a lot of knowledge. You need knowledge about skills. Okay, and you need knowledge of the industry, specific domains. Now, how do you actually develop consultants for the industry? What are the competencies required for this job?
I would say consulting business is a very, very high energy business, because you have to be on your toes. There's plenty of traveling involved. As I said, there's no one single situation. You're posed with multiple challenges all the time. So I think the competencies that you look to develop would be some of the basic consulting skills, which is about being able to understand. You got to be able to have a very, very good understanding of the broad, the aspects of a business. Irrespective of whatever nature of the industry it is, you got to have the basic tenets of a business understood very well. So how a procurement division works, how a sales function would work, what are the features of an HR function. So you need to have a very broad, and in my view, you need to have a very thorough understanding of how an organization works in general. What are the components of how what makes an organization succeed, what makes an organization fail, and how the business architecture, the internal business architecture of an organization. These are things you learn over time. I mean, how much ever you try and learn from the books, there's a lot of learning that you only when you closely encounter with situations, you actually see large corporations in close quarters, you understand that. And I think over time it is about being versatile is important, because like consulting, as there's no stereotype in it. I think it's not a stereotype business. It's a business which is very exciting, because it brings it brings the best out of you, because it's like you being an artist. It allows you to be creative. You're being asked of an opinion, so you can come out with something which is completely out of the box. And the clients today are looking for not something which they've already seen in the past. If an organization wants to succeed today, they're looking for an advice which will take them much ahead in the game. So they're really looking for something fresh. They're looking for new. They're looking for something out of the box. So I think people who are able to use their basic skills, which they have taken from the classroom through to their experience, into creating something which is very unique for a client. And that's what consulting business to me is really. It becomes very powerful to the client, because clients would value that opinion. Because if you are going and telling him what clients have done in the past, I don't think that is really adding much of value. You really want the organizations today are looking for advice which others cannot emulate that easily. If there are things which 10 other companies can easily emulate, you're asking a competition to join your your party. So you want something which is very, very difficult for your competition to emulate, and which takes you. So I think consultants have a long way to go. A great opportunity there. People who have, but I think the core competency would be thorough knowledge of business, how a business works. If you're specializing in the area, deep specialization in that area, and I think the ability to completely think out of the box and creative solutions, I think would be the order of the day.
How does the consulting industry go about the business? What is the kind of process or cycle of operations in the industry?
So I think the most important part of the consulting life cycle is actually the pursuit part. I would call it as the pursuit, which is about going and winning a client, really. Because if you don't have a client, you're not doing business. So it's about winning a consulting business, which we call as pursuit. Going and pursuing a piece of business or a client, and then winning that. And then it's about how do you contract. There is the discussion around the scope, and then you delivering that piece of work to client satisfaction. So really it's a pursuit, it's the delivery, and then it is about the follow-up of that engagement that leads to the next one, really. So I think it's and to me, you can sell a lot of consulting work, but you're as good as your last piece of work. And clients today are looking for the quality of work. There's no question, there's no compromise on the quality of work as far as clients are concerned. Clients are willing to pay, but they need good quality.
Yeah, in consulting, a huge amount of change management is involved, because you'll be advising the client on some problems. You'll also be helping the client in implementing solutions. So every aspect of business you'll be taking care of. The challenge is huge. Now, how do you actually gain this kind of expertise, maybe for the organization? How do you manage the knowledge and the kind of expertise you already accumulated with the organization?
I think the consulting business, the success of consulting business leans towards you able to exploit or leverage the experiences that you've gained from other clients. So unless you have a very, very strong knowledge management system within consulting business, it's very hard to run a consulting business. So you cannot reinvent the wheel every single time. You have to fall back on the experience that you've gained, the research that you've done in the past. All of that becomes your fallback. And that's your starting point. That's your asset. That's your knowledge asset that consulting firms lean on. Because that's why established consulting firms are more powerful or stronger than the new ones, because they have the repository, they have the knowledge, they have the know-how, not just through the people but also the IP they have established over years. And I think you talked about another subject, which is also when you go into a client place, the whole change management. And I think consultants today, and a lot of what you're seeing today is not just advice being given. A lot of clients today want help in actually implementing the solution. We don't want consultants. A lot of clients would tell you that we don't want consultants to come and tell us how to do it. Show us how to do it. Actually do it for us. So be part of the organization, handhold them through the journey. So I think that's another remarkable change that we are seeing in the industry, where the people are being asked to the consultants are being asked to implement the solutions that are being advised really. So I think that brings a big equation of change management, because consulting most of what you do involves a change, because you're asking from a particular position to be changed to another position. So there's change involved. And when you have human beings, change becomes very difficult, because human beings generally are reluctant to change. So getting their minds and hearts again, together and being open to that change is a big thing. So I think change management, you would see, again, is a profession that's becoming such a powerful field in itself, because people who are able to influence and get through that change, communicate that change, bring people together, get the buy-in. It's a very big term in consulting business or any organizational business term. You'll hear the word buy-in. And it's important that the consultants are able to work with organization leaders to get the buy-in of their people, because otherwise most of the projects tend to fail. Large organizational or transformation projects, we call it as transformational projects in our parlance, tend to fail because you're not being able to get the acceptance or the buy-in of the key stakeholders, which invariably are people.
The industry involves huge risks. Okay, the consultant will be advising or maybe overseeing implementation, but ultimately the cost has to be paid by the company, the client organization. Does your client organization make you accountable to some results?
I think, again, you're touching on a very relevant point, because clients today are looking for outcomes. A lot of the payment mechanisms are linked, or the payments are linked for consultant, they're linked to actual delivery of results. So, from being just committing to deliver something is very different from actually showing results. So today the consulting business is also coming under a lot of pressure, because the clients are becoming more and more intelligent to actually link the outcomes to the fee structure. So I think that's a very, very important shift, because the moment you're involved in implementing something, you have to show results. It's very different from giving a piece of advice and then walking away, as opposed to taking that advice and implementing that. Implementation should end in results. So when you have results, when you have to demonstrate results, you can easily link that back, that becomes your KPIs, and then you can link that back to your fee structure. Yes, it is an emerging trend in the industry.
Yeah, there are hundreds of thousands of management students willing to enter the consulting industry, and you will have plenty of opportunities to hire people. Now, what do you look for in those aspirants to enter the industry, in terms of maybe skills or competencies, etc.?
I think for me, consulting again depends on what you're hiring for. But for a junior consultant who is just about going to come through the ranks, I would look for a good educational background, someone who has actually done a good business degree. I mean, whether you call it an MBA or in any other form, but a very solid business degree is important, because he should have gone through and depends on whether he specializes in finance or marketing, but it's important that he has studied the overall business architecture very well. And in terms of attributes, you look for someone who's got the energy level, because as I said, consulting business is a 24/7 business. Really, the clients are always at you. There's no place to hide in this business, really, because you're always being asked questions. There's pressure to deliver, as you said, deliver results for clients. So I think high energy is a very, very important attribute. I think ability, to present and articulate your thoughts. I think equally important. Being a consultant, you can be in our profession, it's important, as much as you're knowledgeable, it's also important that you're able to communicate that to your clients and influence your clients, really, so that they buy your service. So I think that communication part is very, very important. Energy levels and a good attitude. Above all, I mean, I can tell you, like any other profession, you can be the best talent ever possible to have seen, but the most important thing is the attitude.
Do these organizations have a strategy to develop these people, particularly the newly recruited people, hired people, into maybe competent consultants? Do they have any consistent program of developing them?
All large consulting firms do invest quite a lot of time and money in training their resources, because training, learning and development is an integral part of a consulting business, because that's what makes you a good professional. There's the whole soft skills part of it, because to be a good consultant, you need to have very, very good, in my view, good interpersonal skills. And I think that someone very naturally gifted in that area, but some would require a lot of training, bit of fine tuning, and that's all part of a firm's responsibility to And once you're in a consulting business, it becomes almost consulting business requirement that you keep upgrading your resources knowledge base. So training is one of the areas that you look for to do that. And all large consulting firms have a very, very dedicated training program. And I think that's what makes resources better and better as they go.
Thank you very much, sir. It's an excellent presentation. We could understand a lot about management consulting and also the advisory services. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.